A new Harvard-Harris poll is out, and it finds that among Americans, 14% of the United States supports Hamas. If you dig a little deeper, 36% of so-called liberals, self-identified, agree that Hamas's attack on Israel, their terror attack, was justified. 36% of liberals say that? Apparently 15% of conservatives say the same. That's odd. For more on this, I'm going to bring in David Harsanyi. He's a senior editor at The Federalist and the author of the book Eurotrash, Why America Must Reject the Failed Ideas of a Dying Continent. David, good to have you with us.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
It has been, I think, an eye-opening experience here in the United States to see the reaction to the terror attack on Israel, especially for I've encountered that Jewish Democrats seem to be having something of a crisis of conscience right now about the party that they've aligned with. What do you think's happening?
Well, as a Jew, I'll just say, where were they? Did they not know Ilhan Omar was in Congress? Did they not know that progressive marches have always had Hamas flags flying? I mean, is this all new to them? Do they not know what's going on in elite institutions and has been for a decade or more? These hermetically closed ideological, factories that pump out radical thinking. I mean, if that's all news to them, they just simply haven't been paying attention. And I fear that when this is, when this is over, it's never over, but you know what I mean, news-wise, everything will go back to how it was before. I hope that's not the case, but I suspect that will be the case.
What do you make of these numbers? I know you've written about them this week, David. It is jarring to see so many Americans, a third of all American liberals, say that they're on the side of the Hamas attack. That's just amazing.
Mostly, it seems to me, when you dig deeper into that poll, that it's young people. Under 25, a big number, I forget what it is, maybe a majority, actually. And then, under 35, it's pretty high as well in the 40s, which tells you the trajectory of where this is all heading. And I think it's rattling, right? Because it's just going to get worse. And you see every time something happens there, and this is the worst thing that's happened in a long time, I think, it's Jewish people. People become more emboldened by these stands, and these people who are emboldened are in, again, elite institutions, in the State Department, on TV, on MSNBC, in Congress, and very few. Where's Chuck Schumer? I mean, is he saying anything about Ilhan Omar? Maybe he is. I don't know, but they become more and more open about it, and then they have these marches now, which are just a bunch of Charlottesville marches all over the country.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And what you see happening, it's interesting, the left has made a routine point of criticizing conservatives, saying that they live in some sort of alternate reality, that they traffic in misinformation, that they're misleading people all the time. But boy, the extent to which that's actually true on the left is very much revealed, so much so that this week, Israel, the Israeli government, had to, yesterday, screen for 200 members of the foreign press 43 minutes of just the most horrific murder and torture and decapitation that they were able to capture from the terrorist attack, including from GoPros worn by some of the Hamas terrorists. And the Israeli government saying they're trying to fight what they view as a massive propaganda campaign to suggest that this was not a terror attack. Certainly, that's that idea, that conspiracy theory is being bought into by so many American liberals.
Yeah, I mean, because, they read the New York Times, which has always been, historically been, anti-Israel, but has now gotten into activist mode for Hamas. I mean, the other day, that story, I'm sure you've spoken about it, where they misled everyone about the hospital bombing and all that. They put a picture of another bomb building on the front. That can't be an accident. That is meant to insinuate, at the very least, that was the building. That's meant to mislead people. You see the editorial board members on Twitter or columnists. These institutions of media have always either played both sides, as if Hamas and the Israeli government are morally equal, or they've just been flat out pro Hamas. And so a lot of maybe liberals see that. I don't know. I'm not trying to make excuses for them because I don't know how anyone who lives in this world could not see the difference.
The New York Times is particularly troublesome for a variety of reasons. I mean, one, of course, is their history of both downplaying the Holocaust and the Soviet massacres. It's well documented. But additionally, the New York Times just rehired a guy as a reporter for them who has a history of praising Adolf Hitler, of all people. His name is Solomon Hiji. He's a Palestinian reporter, and he has contributed now 9 articles for the New York Times. Colin Rugg on Twitter pointing this out. Since the Israel-Hamas war began back in 2018, Hiji took to Facebook to voice his support for Hitler. The photo was of himself and had the caption, quote, "in a state of harmony as Hitler was during the Holocaust." In 2012, he posted another image of Hitler with the caption, "How great you are, Hitler." The New York Times has decided to rehire this guy, and they said they talked to him to make sure that he doesn't do anything like this while he's working for them.
I love how we're supposed to pretend like that sort of thing's just something accidental or childish or something someone can get over. Like, have you ever accidentally or in jest posted a picture of Hitler, or anything like that? Of course not. So, yeah, I mean, at least Durante had the decency not to maybe put up posters of Stalin in his office. I don't know, but yeah, I mean, look at the editorial board. Peter Beinart writes for them. He's pro-Hamas as well, or at the very least an apologist for Hamas. So, I don't know. You try to fight all that propaganda, but again, it just seems to be headed in the wrong direction.
Right. It's pretty overwhelming. And it's almost to a point that it's like cartoonish, unfortunately. Yesterday, Karine Jean-Pierre was asked about the rise in anti-Semitism in the United States, and she came out with an answer about how what we really need to deal with is Islamophobia. It's like, what are you talking about? So Israel's the victim of a terror attack, and our real concern is, quote, Islamophobia?
Yeah, I mean, they do this constantly. Whenever Jews are being killed, the big topic becomes Islamophobia because, of the supposed blowback that happens, which doesn't really happen. I'm not saying it never happens, but it's not a huge issue in the United States at all. And it's a way, honestly, Ilhan Omar does this as well. She gets death threats and this and that. It's meant to chill speech. So you're not supposed to point out, I'm sorry, this is a fact that many Muslim Americans are anti-Israel at the very least, or worse. You see the marches. Doesn't mean you're born that way. Doesn't mean all Muslims, et cetera, et cetera. But but you're not supposed to mention that. I'm not supposed to talk about that. And this is a way to chill speech, and that's why they talk about Islamophobia. Obviously, remember when, I think it was Ilhan Omar, Nancy Pelosi wrote this resolution and they were going to condemn her and all that. And in the end, they put like every hatred that exists in there. You know what I mean? Like transphobia, this, that. It just waters down anti-Semitism. You never see that if it happens in some other way. If there's an act of, homophobia or whatever, they don't water it down with anti-Semitism. It's only anti-Semitism that gets that treatment. Right.
And then there's other examples of that in recent years where you have, visibly observant Jewish people being attacked in the streets. And if the assailant is black, the media doesn't admit it at all. They just pretend like it didn't happen, or they just talk about some, broad anti-Semitism. It was probably white supremacists, they imply, and on and on. There's always this kind of like obscuring of the details, and it doesn't inform people.
Yeah, and I'm not. Listen, I think anti-Semitism exists on the right, on the left, and all that. Except, those guys cosplaying Nazi in front of Disney have zero power. They're not at the New York Times. They are bad people, but there is a lot of embedded anti-Semitism, functional anti-Semitism in a lot of our institutions, and that is much more dangerous, and we're not even supposed to talk about it.
Yes. So whereas you have fringe people on the right who represent these ideas, the left has had operational identity politics that is very damaging. That is infected, as you point out, all of these institutions, whether it's Hollywood, the major media, the government, big corporations. It's everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, think about this. BLM got tens of billions of dollars from corporations, and they've always been open about this. Yeah. Even the women's march. Remember, a lot of those founders were. I don't mean anti-Semitism like they don't like Bibi Netanyahu. I mean anti-Semitism like they said Jews had brought slaves here, stuff like all these Farrakhan type conspiracy theories.
Sure.
Where everyone just pretends it doesn't exist on that side, and it's now, as I said at the beginning, I don't understand why these people are surprised.
No, and so it gives like some of these lefty lawmakers and others license, they feel like, to just continue to utter like these falsehoods. Rashida Tlaib yesterday was doubling down on her claims that Israel had indeed bombed a hospital in Gaza, killing hundreds. Every detail of that claim has been disproven in some meaningful way, including that it was actually a bombing of the parking lot, that it was actually Islamic Jihad that fired the missile, and it wasn't hundreds of people. In fact, it may have been fewer than 50. But Tlaib just sticking to her guns and say, hey, look, Israel and the United States, they're populated by liars, she says, and we can't trust a thing they say. This is a sitting U.S. Congresswoman, David Harsanyi.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to fight against that because some people won't believe it. They won't believe the deaths on the Jewish side, but they readily believe the Hamas propaganda. And, AP, Reuters, all these places went along with it. And it's, as much as I hate a lot about social media and Twitter, I'm happy that these stories can be debunked right away, because in the old days, there were just 3 networks and a few newspapers, and they just went with these stories, and it would almost, it would take months, maybe, if ever, that you could debunk them. So I appreciate that part of social media.
Yeah, and that way, social media has been a force for good and truth, honestly. And that's why, as soon as that story was developing last week, it was crystal clear to me that this was way more complicated than the way the New York Times was representing it, and they were taking Hamas's word, literally Hamas's word, for what went down within seconds, and doing it proudly.
Yeah, there's another hospital in Gaza City, which is actually Hamas headquarters. That's where all the leadership goes. And Israel does what it cannot. I mean, everyone knows, anyone with a brain knows Israel does not target civilians in hospitals and mosques. They target Hamas, which hides behind these people. And at some point, Israel will have to go into these places if they really want to dislodge Hamas. And that's on Hamas. That's not on Israel. No normal country would allow a terror state to operate on its border like this, and they have to do something about it. So,
yeah, they do. All right, David Harsanyi over at the Federalist. Thank you for covering these important issues and surveying what's going on in our country. Thank you, sir.